So the Nintendo Switch has been out for over 18 months now, and I think I speak for myself and for the other 20 million plus people who own the successful hybrid when I say that I just want to play everything on it. Sure, the hardware isn't without its faults, which is why it's probably getting a slight revision sometime in 2019 according to many outlets, a la the DS Fat to the DS Lite, but its accessibility and already great library of games have made it a hot product for consumers. In fact, the system even has a large software attach rate, which is why we've seen so many third-party companies in the last year port so many of their games onto the thing. You've got the indie darlings of Undertale, Overcooked and Celeste. There are the hugely popular titles of Rocket League, Minecraft and Fortnite. Even some of the big publishers like Bethesda, who has released the likes of Doom, Wolfenstein and their like 50th port of Skyrim. Heck, look at Square, who were so surprised with the success of Octopath Traveler on the Switch that they're like, oh, people like JRPGs on the system? Well, here, have like 15 Final Fantasy games. Even Capcom have finally announced that they're doing the same thing with Resident Evil. But hey, sometimes I can be a selfish kind of guy and still want for more. So as much as I love to buy the brand new games on the Switch, there's still a part of me that wants to play some of the older classics on it as well. Now, before I get ahead of myself, I don't mean just wanting old Nintendo classics that the company have re-released time and time before, like on some kind of virtual console, but rather the games that have been either forgotten about or have just never appeared on a Nintendo system before. I'm trying to be realistic with the hardware of the Switch itself though, so big games like Red Dead Redemption 2 just won't work without completely downgrading the entire experience, as well as licenses and exclusivity. So saying, I want the God of War is pointless and dumb. Now I'm going to be listing 10 purely because it's a nice round number and it looks cool for the title of this video, but these are just my 10 that I want. Any that I don't mention that you can think of, well, feel free to let me know in the comments section down below, because there's a lot of amazing games out there that exist that aren't currently on the Switch. Oh, and one last thing. These 10 games are just in an alphabetical order because I felt like ranking them in some kind of arbitrary way was, well, kind of arbitrary and pointless. But anyway, enough of the intro, let's just go straight into my first pick. So I mentioned earlier how Red Dead Redemption 2 is probably never going to happen on Nintendo's current system, but Rockstar's previous open world outing definitely should. On a technical level, the Switch is more than capable to run GTA 5. Now, I'm no technician, but the PS3 and 360 versions ran fine at 30 frames per second back in 2013. Now I'm realising that was over 5 years ago. And sure, the next gen versions ran at twice the frames, so the Switch would probably run at a similar frame rate as the last gen versions, but let's not forget that this wouldn't be the first time a Rockstar game came to Nintendo's latest platform, as LA Noire was only re-released for the Switch late last year. Moreover, GTA 5 is not only still selling extremely well today, like it's still in the top 10 best-selling games every month, but Rockstar are still updating and releasing new content for GTA Online to this day. GTA 5 may not be my favourite GTA game, shout out to the underappreciated Chinatown Wars, but it just makes a lot of sense on the Switch. A console that's still selling so well, and a game that's still selling so well. Put them together and you have a perfect match. It'll be a nice little easy project after so many hard hours of playing to Red Dead Redemption 2 and too soon for an overtime joke. Yeah, I thought as much.
This is not a game to me. Alright, this is a fucking way of life.
Speaking of bestsellers, what about Mario Kart? I mean, it's only consistently been one of Nintendo's best-selling franchise on every platform they release. So whilst I have no doubt that they're more than likely already hard at work on whatever Mario Kart 9 turns out to be, it's probably safe to assume it's still a couple of years out. So what better way to tide us karting fans over in the meantime than with a bundle of 3 arcade games? Since 2005, Nintendo and Namco have released multiple Mario Kart arcade machines. There's the original Arcade GP, its sequel Arcade GP 2 from 2007, and a third, titled Arcade GP DX in 2013, which featured the gliding mechanic first introduced in the 3DS's Mario Kart 7, as well as a team mode where players can combine their karts, kind of like in Mario Kart Double Dash. And any game that incorporates elements of Double Dash is a-okay in my book. And if you remember, there's actually a fourth game which was released last year, but only in Japanese arcades and it's in VR. So it's safe to say that it won't be coming to the Switch, but the first 3 definitely should. Or at least the third one should anyway, because GP DX actually included some tracks from the first 2 arcade games, making it sort of a greatest hits when it comes to the tracks. So like I said earlier, Mario Kart sells, and Nintendo have a bunch of Mario Kart games that they could just release in some sort of bundle for the Switch while we wait for the next mainline game. Or they could just re-release Double Dash with online play in HD. I don't mind. A No More Heroes duology honestly feels like another no-brainer. You've got a new No More Heroes game in Travis Strikes Again coming out early next year for the Switch, so what better way to expose the series to a whole new audience by drumming up anticipation for the new one and releasing the two old ones from the Wii. I guess the only hesitation is that Travis Strikes Again plays completely differently from those two, in that it's a top-down action game rather than a full third-person action game. But the story is still a continuation of 1 and 2, and it can't exactly hurt to get these amazing games into the hands of more players. The original game was released over a decade ago now and saw you playing as the incredibly likeable dick of an assassin Travis Touchdown. The game had motion controls, because of course a fairly early Wii title did, but they were actually incredibly fun and simple, as you didn't swing the Wiimote to replicate the swing of the beam katana, but rather use something novel, like a button press. Who would have thought? Instead you would shake the Wiimote to charge your beam katana in this suggestive manner, so basically my point is that this could easily translate to the Switch's Joy-Cons. They actually already did re-release the first No More Heroes in HD for the PS3 back in 2010, in the form of No More Heroes, Heroes Paradise. So there you go, half the work is already done, right? However, unlike the US version, both the Japanese and European versions of the first No More Heroes completely remove the blood when you kill the enemies. Instead, they disappear into a puff of black smoke and money. It was weird. The sequel rectified this by including the over-the-top red stuff, as well as including the ability to use a classic controller if you prefer. So I guess if it does come to Switch, you could easily play in handheld mode too.
How about you fill us in on everything that's happened since the last game? We're not going to be satisfied until you do, right?
Overwatch is probably the only game on this list that I could see not happening purely for technical reasons. It runs everywhere else at no less than 60 frames, which can't realistically happen on Switch without completely reworking the entire game. I don't think it's beyond impossible, as even hinted at by a Blizzard producer after releasing the studio's own Diablo 3 for the system. Maybe they've reduced some of the lighting, the particle effects, or maybe even the total players in a match, which I hope not, but I believe Blizzard have a standard of never wanting to reduce the frame rate, otherwise it will probably lose that competitive edge. People will probably point at Paladins as evidence that Overwatch can work on Switch, but that game does indeed only run at 30 frames per second, sometimes even lower in hectic firefights. Plus, no offense to Paladins, but it sucks and pales in comparison to Overwatch. Hot take, I know. Who knows if it can happen, will happen, but I definitely want it to happen, because Overwatch seems like a perfect fit for Nintendo's audience, what with its colourful and cartoony style. I mean, it would be pretty cool if we even managed to get some exclusive skins, kinda like how Tekken Tag Tournament 2 did on the Wii U. So I don't know, you could have a Bowser skin for Roadhog, Samus's Varia suit for Farah, or a DK suit and tie for Winston. This kind of crossover writes itself, let's be honest. I know Blizzard's other recent IP, Hearthstone, would be way easier to port, and frankly should happen as well because it's still very popular, but it's a card game, and frankly I find card games boring. Sorry.
The world needs us now, more than ever. Are you with me?
This time last year, I'd never have thought that PUBG would have been possible on the Switch. The Xbox One port was, and still is, far below what the standard should be, even after entering its full 1.0 release early this year. It runs like crap, there's a bunch of environmental pop-in, and I've had the game crash on me multiple times. So why do I want this on Switch? Well, despite all of its faults, I still really enjoy playing the game, especially with friends. Plus, PUBG is now available on mobile and seems to somehow run actually decent. Like, this is a version that was seemingly made from the ground up just for mobile. Even being free to play rather than a fixed price, still with microtransactions like on Xbox One, which is just a bad PC port. So if a Switch port could get just as much care and attention as the mobile version, but with the added bonus of having, you know, actual controls, then sign me up to inevitably get shot halfway across the field after running straight for 15 minutes. Obviously there's the whole Fortnite comparison, that's already on the Switch and runs decently enough, but I'm sorry, I wouldn't say I hate Fortnite, but I'm a PUBG kind of guy, you know? I just can't be dealing with all that building crap. Apparently PUBG is rumoured to finally be coming to PS4 now that the Xbox console exclusivity is almost up, so it's not impossible to see this in some form on the Switch relatively soon. And let's be honest, PUBG is trying to catch back up to the juggernaut that is now Fortnite, so this wouldn't be a bad thing for them. If there's one game on this list that deserves a second chance, it's the underrated Wii gem Red Steel 2. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The first Red Steel is a bad game. Yeah, it was cool back at the Wii's launch to hold the gun sideways by twisting the remote, all gangster style and shit, but the overall controls were... The sequel, released 3 years later, however, couldn't be far more removed from the original. Literally the only similarity is that they're both first-person shooters with swords, but even then Red Steel 2 plays better in every way. One of the huge improvements being that the game required the Wii Wii's Motion Plus accessory. I'm not a Skyward Sword hater, but Red Steel 2 nailed the sword combat way better than the 2011 Zelda game, even seamlessly incorporating gunplay into the mix. So yeah, if this would have come to Switch, replacing the Wiimote with Joy-Cons, it probably wouldn't work in handheld mode, but that's fine because they could make so many other worthwhile improvements instead. The obvious one being to up-res it to HD. The game's cel-shaded visuals still look great today, even running at 60 frames. But you know, a little HD lighting and polish would be cool. However, the main thing for me would be to cut down the load times, because the original has a bunch of doors that take ages to unlock, masking the loading times, similar to what Metroid Prime 3 kind of became infamous for. Oh, and there's also these unskippable tutorials because apparently Ubisoft was scared that people wouldn't know how to swing a sword with a newfangled peripheral 9 years ago. Like, sure, I get it, maybe on your first playthrough, but on subsequent playthroughs, it's beyond annoying, harming the game's replay value, especially considering there isn't much replay value to begin with, beyond a handful of challenge missions. Financially, does it make sense for Ubisoft to re-release this lost gem? Nah, not really, but if it were to do well enough to warrant a sequel in the style of Red Steel 2, I'd definitely be getting it on day one.
Oh, they're dead! And I'm gonna kill you too, you coward! I'm gonna bleed you dry!
This isn't something I've ever mentioned on this channel before, but I'm a huge fan of the original RollerCoaster Tycoon on PC. It's one of my favourite games of all time, as well as its numerous expansions and eventual sequel. However, since then the series has been butchered beyond recognition. I know the third entry has its fans, but I never cared much for it. Then, nothing for ages. Then in 2014, a mobile game aptly titled RollerCoaster Tycoon for mobile, and it was absolute dogshit. It was received so bad in fact that its big PC brother, RollerCoaster Tycoon 4, had its name changed before release to RollerCoaster Tycoon World, as to completely distance itself from that rubbish, only for World to turn out to be pretty rubbish as well. And then, when all hope was thought lost, like a beacon of light from the heavens, aka Scotland, a port of the original two classics was brought over into one package for iOS and Android in late 2016, even being worked on by the original developer Chris Sawyer. There's no microtransactions, it's one fixed price and uses the exact same interface and style. Sure, it can be a little finicky when playing this on a phone, but why can't this come over to Switch? Because I need this. Just do what Pokemon Quest does, where it's all touchscreen in handheld mode, but you use a little hand cursor when in docked mode on the TV. Although, as I write this, I'm just now finding out that there is indeed a RollerCoaster Tycoon game coming to the Switch, and it's a port of the 2016 mobile game RollerCoaster Tycoon Touch, which is apparently okay for a mobile game, or at least better than RCT4 was, as damning praise as that is, even though it is of course riddled with microtransactions. Oh, but wait, it gets worse. Apparently, this Switch port is being made possible because Atari turned to crowdfunding for it. And wow, I can't say I'm exactly surprised that this isn't being received particularly well. This is Atari, legendary game company from the 1970s and 80s, who have turned to crowdfunding to make a port of the mobile game RollerCoaster Tycoon Touch for the Nintendo Switch. Huh, I feel like I could make a whole video ranting about this revelation, but I won't because this is actually fairly old news. So I'll just finish here by saying, Atari, you got the wrong game. Chris Sawyer, where are you? Please come and save us from this nightmare. You're our only hope.
Atari's top 10 franchises have earned over $2 billion. We know what we're doing. We've done this.
Recently, Austrian-based publisher THQ Nordic have been acquiring long-dead IPs like they're going out of fashion, only to then re-release them on current hardware to keep up with the fashion. Games like Darksiders, Red Faction and The Blob, the latter of which only released on Switch earlier this year, but they're showing no sign of stopping anytime soon, as they've also recently acquired the rights to Alone in the Dark, Kingdoms of Amalur, and my personal favourite, TimeSplitters. Now THQ Nordic aren't just acquiring these IPs for fun, although they could have fooled me, as they're surely gonna want to do something with them. Usually it means at the very least them releasing the old one to see if it sells well enough, and if it does, then make a new one. Just like they're doing with Darksiders 3. Will they re-release the TimeSplitters game separately or as a bundle? Who knows? But the first one is kind of redundant if you've already got TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect in the same bundle, as the original TimeSplitters is basically just a multiplayer game with a hastily put together campaign. It wasn't until the sequels that developer Free Radical started focusing on an actual narrative and giving us one of the greatest FPS protagonists ever in Sergeant Cortez. There was at some point a fan-made remake of all three games multiplayer modes that was happening, but that slowed down real bad, and I imagine probably won't still be happening now that THQ Nordic own the rights and probably want to do it themselves. But honestly, just to play TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect in HD and on a handheld thanks to the Switch would be a dream come true. As I've stated on this channel before, GoldenEye 64 is my favourite game of all time, and the TimeSplitters series of games were its spiritual successors. After of course Perfect Dark was its own spiritual successor, and also GoldenEye Wii, which was a fine game but didn't really capture the essence essence of GoldenEye 64 like TimeSplitters and Perfect Dark did. But not Perfect Dark Zero, because that is a bad game which completely... Anyway, bring back TimeSplitters, that's all I want, and we'll see. If they sell well enough this time, maybe we'll finally get that 4th game.
You go first.
Okay.
Believe it or not, the unlikely legend of Rusty Pup was originally scheduled for release in 2014. In fact, I even made a video in early 2015 counting down my most anticipated Wii U games of that year. Many delays and refinements later, and the game has finally and recently been released on Steam in October, with a supposed iOS version currently in the works. But I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, so what exactly is the unlikely legend of Rusty Pup, and why should you care? Well, first of all, it's from the two-man team at Gory Detail, which consists of ex-Rare alums Sean Pyle and Chris Seaver, the latter of which is most well known for being the voice and director of Rare's own N64 classic Conker's Bad Fur Day. And although Rusty Pup on the surface doesn't look much like Conker, as it's more a 2D puzzle game, think Lemons but way more sadistic, it shares much of that game's wit and charm. I just love the whole mechanical look of the game and how alive yet rustic and dark it is. Even the menus are rich with atmosphere. So I guess, where does the Switch fit into all this? Well, despite the game originally being scheduled for both 3DS and Wii U, the Switch's touchscreen and handheld mode would be a perfect fit for the game. I'm sure you could do some kind of pointer controls for docked mode, but obviously playing it in handheld mode would be where it's at. The thing is, I kinda cheated with this entry, as the devs have already expressed a great want to get this game on the Switch via Twitter. But as mentioned earlier, Gory Detail are currently just a two-man team. Yeah, they could outsource it to another developer to save them the work, but again, they've stated that, and I quote, "We'd never get an external team to convert. It's gotta be your baby, else you do a shoddy job." And you've gotta respect that. So I think this is one game on this list that is more a case of when rather than if, or you know, you could just buy it now on Steam while you wait to support them, because we can never have enough quirky games like this on the Switch.
Now that's what I call a bowel movement.
To finish off this video, we have another underappreciated Wii gem in the form of Wario Land, the Shake Dimension, or Shake It as it's known in the Americas. This was basically Wario Land 5 in all but its name, but because it didn't sell very well, especially compared to other Nintendo developed games on the Wii at the time, it's the reason why we haven't seen another Wario Land entry since. So there's multiple reasons why I want this game to be released for the Switch. The first being to revive the series, hopefully leading to a 6th Wario Land game, but also just because the Shake Dimension deserves to be brought into the HD era. The 2D hand-drawn sprite's art style desperately needs an HD makeover. Not to mention that the original Wii release is stuck in an awkward 4:3 aspect ratio because the title was actually meant to be a late GameCube game. And for those that don't know, it was actually developed by Goodfill, the same company that would go on to make Kirby's Epic Yarn on the Wii, Yoshi's Woolly World for the Wii U, and the upcoming Yoshi's Crafted World for the Switch. The former two actually have 3DS ports either released or are soon coming out, so why not give the developer's best game a second chance too? And yes, you heard me correctly, Wario Land the Shake Dimension is Goodfill's best game to date, or at least my favourite, you know, opinions and all that. And with that, I'm done. Hope you enjoyed this video, but I hope more so that these games on this list see a release on Nintendo's latest system in some form or another, because I have a personal attachment to all of them and think they deserve to be here. But as mentioned in the intro of this video, let me know what games you want to see on the Switch. I don't just want the name of a game, but your reasoning for why it should be there too. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.